Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.
Good afternoon, Team Krulak community, and on behalf of Marine Corps University, the Marine Corps University Foundation, and the Krulak Center for Innovation and Future Warfare, welcome back to the Broadcast, our series designed to connect the worlds of the warfighter and PME with the best in innovative and creative thought. I'm your host, Major Ian Brown, Operations Officer at the Krulak Center. Before we begin, please remember that all opinions expressed here are those of the individual and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Krulak Center, Marine Corps University, Naval War College, the United States Marine Corps, or any other agency of the U.S. government. So today, we're excited to bring you the newest of our new cadre of Team Krulak non-resident fellows. We're joined by Dr. James Holmes, who I should mention is a new fellow, but a Brewcast alumnus, having joined us back in March for a panel event focusing on the South China Sea. He is a professor of strategy, the inaugural holder of the J.C. Wylie Chair of Maritime Strategy, and a two-time visiting professor of national security affairs at the Naval War College. He's published over 25 book chapters and 350 scholarly essays, along with hundreds of opinion columns, think tank analyses, and other works. Dr. Holmes has been quoted or cited in outlets ranging from the Economist to Xinhua, and appeared on such broadcast outlets as the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, National Public Radio, and the BBC. His most recent books are A Brief Guide to Maritime Strategy and a second edition of Red Star Over the Pacific, China's Rise and the Challenge to U.S. Maritime Strategy. I should mention Red Star Over the Pacific was named to the Navy Professional Reading List as advanced reading and was also selected for the U.S. Marine Corps and U.S. Indo-Pacific Command Professional Reading List. So, sir, thank you for joining us again now in your new capacity as non-resident fellow, and I'll turn things over to you.
Hi, thanks, Ian. It's a privilege to be with all of you. This afternoon, let's have a little fun. Let me try to give you my take on Chinese sea power in 10 minutes. The Pentagon tells us that the Indo-Pacific is our priority theater and that China is the main pacing threat in that region. Competing effectively in that region means convincing friends and potential foes that we have the capability to do what we say we will and the willpower to do it, whether that's keeping our alliance commitments to our friends or defeating potential antagonists in the Indo-Pacific. So to deter China and give heart to America's friends, we have to understand China's military strategy to prove that we can beat it. Which brings me to the meat of the talk. To help explain China's strategy this afternoon, I will invoke one strategic concept, three metaphors, and two old operational concepts made new. The strategic concept is active defense, and it comes from Mao Zedong, founding chairman of the Chinese Communist Party. Active defense is nothing more than using offensive tactics and operations to weaken a stronger foe while you remain on the strategic defense. You can gather your resources for battle in the interim, harness new resources, get the opponent to divide its forces, or break up the enemy's alliances. Over time, if successful, the weak make themselves into the stronger contender, go on the strategic offensive, and win. China's 2015 military strategy affirms that active defense remains the essence of Chinese communist strategic thought, not just relevance, but the essence, dating all the way back to land warfare in the 1920s and 30s. Which leads me to the first metaphor, the rope-a-dope. It comes from Mao Zedong himself. Mao observed that a weaker but crafty boxer can defeat a bigger, stronger opponent by conserving his energy in the early rounds while the opponent wastes his energy trying to land a knockout punch. So a planned retreat is good strategy at the outset of a bout. If lesser pugilists are patient while the strong exhaust themselves, the weak become the relatively strong by the later rounds. They outlast the strong or land a crushing counterpunch of their own against a depleted adversary. That's just what Muhammad Ali did to the stronger George Foreman during the famous Rumble in the Jungle in 1974, and it's what Mao envisioned the People's Liberation Army doing. Active defense is a rope-a-dope strategy. The second metaphor also comes from Mao, the hand. What does he mean by that? Mao noted that his Red Army could be stronger than the enemy at a particular place on the map at a particular time, even while it remained weaker on the whole than the adversary. So he taught commanders to seek out opportunities to encircle and annihilate isolated enemy forces. It was better to cut off one of the enemy's fingers entirely than to mash them all. Cut off your enemy's fingers one by one, and pretty soon it's hard for him to make a fist. This is what Chinese strategists today call systems destruction warfare. If China's enemies fight as a system, PLA commanders strike at whatever holds that system together and then overpower isolated units or formations one by one. So the PLA is trying to give us a no-win situation. mass in space for combat and subject yourself to concentrated barrages of firepower, or disperse in space and subject yourself to destruction bit by bit. This adds up to the third metaphor, one of my own coinage, the crumple zone. Think about what the crumple zone is. The crumple zone in your car is a sacrificial component designed to collapse in a controlled way upon impact. It absorbs the energy from a collision before it harms what you really care about, namely the people in the cabin. Now overlay that metaphor onto the map of the Western Pacific. China's crumple zone is oriented to blunt the impact from U.S. forces coming from the east to unite with forces already in the theater. China's active defenders do not kid themselves that they can block U.S. forces out of regional waters and skies altogether, any more than car designers see the crumple zone as an unbendable barrier against shock. Instead, active defense is designed to raise the price of entry into the Western Pacific higher than any U.S. president would pay, and thus keep America from fulfilling its alliance commitments. Failing that, it seeks to slow us down so that China can finish what it starts before we reach the scene of battle. Successful active defense would compel us to undo a done deal, dislodging the PLA from whatever it had seized in the meantime. And since tactical defense is the strongest form of warfare, military logic would be an ally for the PLA. So those are the three metaphors: the rope-a-dope, the hand losing its fingers, and the crumple zone. How will the PLA put active defense into practice, sucking the energy out of our cross-Pacific counteroffensive? As I contended at the outset, by making two old concepts new. The first one comes from Captain Alfred Thayer Mahan, the Fortress Fleet. What did he mean by that? A century ago, Mahan was deeply critical of operating fleets within range of shore fire support. Back then, the range of a gun was a few short miles. Fleets could accomplish little while remaining within reach of supporting coastal artillery. But does this critique hold up today? I don't think so. What if coastal artillery could strike effectively at moving fleets at sea scores or even hundreds or even thousands of miles offshore? That would let a fortress fleet roam across vast expanses while still enjoying shore fire support. Precision, long-range coastal artillery is precisely what the PLA has fielded with manned aviation and especially with its family of anti-ship cruise and ballistic missiles. Coastal sites can reportedly strike more than 2,000 miles out to sea, out to Guam and potentially beyond. 2,000 miles is a heck of a lot of maneuvering space for the PLA Navy's surface battle fleet. Bottom line, ultra-long-range coastal artillery provides fire support to the fleet while weakening U.S. forces bound for the region. The other concept comes from the 19th century French Navy, the Xinhua, or New School of Naval Warfare. This is nothing more than super-empowering submarines and small surface craft with heavy-hitting new weaponry to threaten capital ships. If all a coastal state cares about is denying a global navy access to its coastal waters, a fleet of small craft can do the trick. Back then, it was torpedo boats and torpedo-armed diesel submarines. Today, it's submarines and small craft sporting torpedoes, cruise missiles, and potentially other exotic armaments. Xinhua craft fan out in the crumple zone. Between them and the coastal artillery, they could give U.S. forces a bad day indeed. In fact, if the strategy works as planned, the PLA Navy battle fleet can remain in reserve until very late in the conflict, letting coastal artillery and small craft soften us up. So what? Three takeaways from all of this. One, this is a strategy that conforms to communist Chinese strategic traditions. Studying China's way of war is a must. Two, the PLA Navy battle fleet probably will not offer battle far out in the Pacific. Commanders will let coastal artillery and the Xinhua craft do their work before they risk the fleet. And three, active defense calls upon the PLA to break up enemy systems so the PLA can cut off our fingers one by one. So we must tend to the resiliency of our systems, whether it's a fleet, an aviation squadron, a brigade, or whatever. Mutual support is crucial. So there you have it. China's maritime strategy in one big idea, three metaphors, and two concepts given new life by time and technology. Thanks for your attention, and I look forward to the important part of our time together, which is our interchange of views. Thanks.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Dr. Holmes. And to the audience, I will, again, reiterate, if you have a question, enter it into the chat and let me know, and then I'll start calling on you to go through. Sort of to get things going here, I have a couple things from your takeaway there that struck me. So First is in sort of describing that the various parts of that approach to warfare. I'm wondering how well postured are we? You know, us in the DoD, us as the Navy Marine Corps team, or the Joint Force, to countering, you know, one or all of those components. And I'm sort of thinking back to, you know, there was a recent article and some analysis on a war game that was run, I think it was last year or the year before, where our concept went against their concept in a digital battle, and we lost badly. And it seemed that some of the output of that game was to not so much flex to their concept, but to do more of what we do, but do it better. So do we need to do it better, or do we need to adapt something to change our posture towards them? Are we changing our posture? And if not, what are some of the things that we need to start looking at here in the near future to counter those three things you mentioned?
Yeah, it's a great question. That's sort of where the rubber meets the road and all this stuff. I actually don't think we're postured well to do it right now, and I think to his credit, General Berger, the commandant, has been probably the most forceful advocate of moving to something that makes us more resilient, that gives us the ability to what you all in the Marine Corps call stand in. We stand in forces, and then you have exterior forces that are doing other things until they can get into the theater to unite and mount a supremacy or a superiority of combat power where it matters and when it matters. So I mean, I think the key to doing the stand-in thing is to do what we're doing. Do distributed operations. Use the fleet in concert with bodies of Marines or even Army troops on Pacific Islands and so forth. I actually wish we were moving a little faster in that direction, but I think the ideas are at least in place in the form of not only distributed maritime operations, but also expeditionary advanced base operations and littoral operations in a contested environment. All things that have been really sort of at the forefront of fleet design, I guess, for the last couple of years since CNO Gilday and especially Commandant Berger came in. But yeah, so I guess I'm an advocate of, yes, I think we actually do need to change what we do. I'm not saying that we're going to get rid of the battle fleet. I think that if you look at the map of the Western Pacific, and if you think about operating along the first island chain, you would probably see our using small craft, whether it's submarines, whether it's bodies of missile-armed Marines on the islands and so forth. So it's sort of lighter forces to stand in while the heavier fleet operates behind the island chain and essentially can try to plug up whatever PLA forces might break through that line of scrimmage into the background, or into the backfield rather. So joint sea power, whether it's the U.S. Navy's battle fleet, whether it's the Air Force playing backup, in a sense, those are the linebackers to help firm up that line. But yeah, so it's clearly quite a different approach from what we've done in the past.
Okay, thank you. I got a first question here in the chat here, and it's from Lieutenant Colonel Zepeda, who's our deputy here at the Krulak Center. Sir, did you want to ask your question directly?
Yes, I was just curious about your views on investing resources on a littoral fleet and maneuver capabilities. It seems to me that based on your perspective of the Chinese strategy, it would somewhat nullify or counter some of these efforts that are underway, and just wondering what your views and opinions are on this.
Yeah, it's a great question, and as you can probably tell, I'm a big advocate of doing this. Sort of disaggregating the fleet into lots of smaller, cheaper, heavy hit, but still heavy hitting platforms. I mean, this is stuff. These are not new ideas. I mean, Wayne Hughes has been pushing this idea in his books on fleet tactics for many years, But yeah, I think that's the way to go. If you're going to stand in, you need to not concentrate such a large percentage of your combat power in each major platform, whether it's a major amphibious ship in the case of you all, or a cruiser or a destroyer, or even an aircraft carrier. So yeah, I think that's the direction we need to go in. The more the better of these smaller warships, whether it's light amphibious warships, all the things we hear about on a daily basis. I think that in a sense it feels like technologically we're almost back in the interwar era, when you think about military innovation back between the world wars. It felt like there was a lot of technologies that looked interesting, but we didn't really know whether they were going to be game-changing technologies, or as Colonel Corbett likes to call in his broadcast that he did with you all some time back. He talks about sustaining innovations, which is basically figuring out how to do what you already do better, So was the aircraft carrier was it actually a new capability, or did it help the battleship fleet do what it already did well better? It almost feels like the Second World War was sort of a field trial to put those ideas to the test. It's kind of hard to tell whether it's kind of hard to tell in peacetime, even through the large scale exercise, all these maneuvers we're always doing. Hard to tell whether those are actually going to be what Corbett calls disruptive innovations that basically change the setting around you and allow potentially a newcomer to the field, whether it's naval warfare or anything else, actually outdo an established power. So this is what Corbett called the military innovator's dilemma, and I think it feels like with unmanned technology, artificial intelligence, all of these things that we see sort of gestating in front of our eyes, it feels like we're sort of trying to figure out which kind of innovation we're talking about. Just kidding. Hopefully we're changing the game, because I think China has changed the game around us with its anti-ship ballistic missiles and all the other stuff that's come online over the last quarter century or thereabouts. Yeah, thanks. That was excellent.
All right, great, sir. Thank you very much. All right, next question I have it's just from Jack. Jack, are you able to ask your question directly? Okay, no, he can't. So I'll go ahead and get it out there.
Dropped out. Looks like.
Yeah. So his question is, how well is China assessed as being able to layer the various levels of forces, like the small craft, long range, coastal missiles, cyber, et cetera, together? Whereas at one time, China had problems getting pilots with enough training. Where are they now in terms of layering their force their people in that force with the capabilities that the force employs?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, net assessment, as you well know, is a really hard thing to do in peacetime, especially when you're talking about the wetware. How well organized or how well trained is a foreign military force to actually accomplish what it looks like it can do, looking at the numbers or the pictures on the paper of Jane's or whatever your favorite place to go for statistics on armaments is. Yeah, I mean, quite clearly China realizes it has a problem in this area. It's in recent years it's gone out of its way to reorganize the People's Liberation Army as a more joint force. I think this is probably where people like you, probably are better suited than myself, because you're actually out there doing classified work in the region. You actually hopefully see firsthand what the PLA does, how good are they, and so on and so forth. Because they're obviously not going to disclose their shortcomings any more than they have to, and therefore I think it behooves people out in the region to actually keep an eye on this and try to puzzle through. Try to puzzle through exactly how good these people are. It's kind of an interesting point. Edward Lutwak, the strategist at CSIS in Washington, wrote a wonderful short book on sea power in the late Cold War. I think it was 1974. And one point he made in sort of in passing was basically exactly what you asked. Exactly how we from the outside tell how good a foreign armed force was. Of course, he was writing about the Soviet Navy at that point, but so the same would go for any other potential adversary. He just basically pointed out, to a great extent, a foreign military force is a black box. We can see the outside. We can sort of infer how well it might perform in actual military operations. But at the same time, we just can't look inside to get that clear an idea. So I think that's sort of the pick and shovel work that we have to do on a daily basis, is try to assess how good China is on a person-for-person basis, as well as having all these impressive military systems that they parade through Beijing and cruise through regional waters and so forth. But yeah, let's not make the PLA 10 feet tall. They quite clearly have some problems as well. No recent combat experience, obviously is a downside as well for them.
And I'd kind of like to jump off that just a little bit on their levels of authority in their command and control structure, because I know one thing that in the American military, especially in Marine Corps and some of the other services we talk about, the mission command aspect, where like I tell you what you need to do, I trust you to go do it, especially if you're like over the horizon and I can't pull you back. There's a level of autonomy and ability to do that, and I'm wondering if there's any similar level given inside the PLA Navy, which would have to operate sort of in a more distributed environment, or whether there's maybe a dichotomy, because you look at, for example, some of the things that their maritime militia seems able to do. It seems like, those very low level tactical commanders have the authority to, be bullies on the scene, and not worry about the repercussions. But does that apply across the forces, or is there maybe a distinction between different elements and sort of how far they're trusted to carry their authority without having permission from their own hires? If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it absolutely makes sense. Yeah, and I think you're right to distinguish between the maritime militia, who are a bunch of cowboys, as far as I can tell, and the actual, not just the military service, but also the China Coast Guard as well. It's a great question, and I think that this would be my guess. I think this is actually an area of advantage for ourselves, because as you point out, we grant, and I hope we keep moving in the direction of granting more latitude for tactical level commanders to actually innovate, just basically go out and accomplish the mission using means and methods that they deem appropriate. And that's something that an authoritarian communist system like China really can't do. Political supervision of operations and even tactics is, it's. And I think we're sort of determining exactly how far it's going to go. But I think that senior commanders in Beijing and places like that just can't let the operator of a warship go out there and sort of take that sort of latitude to conduct operations and tactics. That if that's right, if decisions have to come from higher ups, obviously that translates into a lag. It could actually translate into more timid operators and so forth. Stationing a political officer on board a warship and making that person equal in rank to the captain of that ship just think about what that would be like, having President Biden or Secretary Austin or somebody like that to have a voice in what you do on a daily basis. So I hope that this will be an area of advantage for ourselves, and I hope that we stop going down that road as well. Just because modern technology, as you all are well aware of, it lets you basically snoop on your subordinates. So we need to maximize that advantage. Yeah, I've actually been speculating that for quite some time. My friend Toshi Yoshihara and I, kind of co-author many years ago, wrote a piece about Chinese ballistic missile submarine operations, basically comparing them to U.S. SSBN patterns, and wondering whether they would actually follow that pattern, in which you basically turn a ballistic missile submarine skipper loose and say basically come back in 70 days after going out and basically losing yourself in the ocean so that you can't be found. Would Beijing actually allow that sort of latitude, or would it be more prone to say, okay, we're going to have close political oversight. You're going to stay in particular grounds, probably in the South China Sea, yada yada yada. So, and I think we don't have a clear answer to that question yet, but I think that's sort of a good case study in the kind of things that you're talking about.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thank you. So I got a request from one of the audience members, and then I'll go into the questions as they come in. So the audience member was asking if you could just reiterate the first two of those three kind of anecdotes you mentioned at the beginning of the presentation.
Oh, the first two. Three. Good grief. Let me call my cheat sheet back up. Without my paper brain, I have a really hard time. Yes. And there we go. Shouldn't have closed it out. Yeah, I think the big idea with it, the big idea was active defense, and then I went into talking about the metaphors of the hand, the rope-a-dope strategy and the hand. They basically, and by the way, don't believe me. Get out there online and actually have a look at Mao's writings if you really want to get a solid grasp on this kind of stuff, because he was actually a very good communicator. When he talks about the rope-a-dope strategy, and by the way, rope-a-dope is actually the boxing term here in the West, but it's exactly what Mao is talking about. And he would have put that idea out there before the Rumble in the Jungle in 1974. But that's exactly what all he did to Foreman in order to prevail in that contest. And hang on just 1 second, and all right, there we go. Open sesame. All right, there we go. Let's see. Okay, so move on here. Oh yeah, the rope. The rope. I mean, if you think about it, what exactly is it? I mean, if you're Ollie, everybody going into that fight in Zaire. I remember. I think I'm probably the oldest person in the room here. But I actually remember it when I was a little kid. But everybody going into this bout in Zaire, saying, "Oh, Foreman's bigger. He's stronger. He's a great champion. Ollie's he's smaller. He's lighter. He's not as rangy, and so on and so forth." But that's these are things that Ollie used to his advantage. He let Foreman keep him on the ropes in the early rounds. He let Foreman take his punches at him, so that he was expending his energy the way Mao said that an overconfident foreign stronger enemy force might do vis-a-vis the Red Army. So he basically essentially says let them do it in the early rounds. Ultimately, they will start wearing themselves out, and if we can be sort of self-restrained, take our time, be patient, and so forth. Ultimately, we can, by conserving our energy, there's going to be a crossover point in combat power between the two contenders. We're going to end up as the stronger adversary, and guess what? In the later stages of a military conflict, we're gonna have the military advantage, and we're gonna actually be able to go on a strategic counteroffensive and win in the Clausewitzian sense. So that's basically what he's talking about when he's talking about active defense. The one about the hand, and by the way, Mao, another reason he's an interesting guy is just because he knew how to communicate complex strategic ideas to ordinary people, Chinese peasants, many of them illiterate back in the 1920s, all the way through the end of the Chinese Civil War in the 1940s. The hand. He's basically saying if you want to harm a stronger enemy force, start cutting it down to size. Don't just try to damage all of your enemy's forces. It's better to encircle and annihilate them one at a time, so that you basically take down your adversary by the death of 1,000 cuts. Take his fingers away one by one, and ultimately he's not going to be able to make a fist. So he's trying to communicate that sort of idea to more junior commanders. Yes, the Red Army goes into this conflict from a position of weakness, but you know what? At the right place, at the right time, on the battlefield, we could actually make ourselves stronger than the opponent at that place and time, even though we're weaker on the whole, and therefore we can actually do that sort of death of 1,000 cuts, that incremental destruction of an enemy's combat power. Did that answer the question?
Yeah.
You want me to go through the crumple zone as well? Like I can do that as well.
I think it was just the first two,
okay.
and she said it did. So thank you for that.
By the way, the crumple zone. I did that. I think it appeared in early 2019. I actually wrote that up for the Naval Institute's proceedings, based on a presentation I did for C.N.O. Richardson and his executive panel in late 2017. So you can find that very easily.
Okay, great. If I can find it, I might put it in the show notes for this episode so other people can read it.
Yeah, I should have sent it to you.
Okay. All right. So got some more questions here. I'm going to go a little bit out of order to folks who haven't asked a question yet. So first, Eric Harris, are you able to ask your question directly? To go with no, so I'll get it out there.
Sound like it.
Yeah. Okay, so his question is, how will China deal with the ground threats such as littoral regiments? Will these be targets for their ballistic missiles, or will they look for alternate means such as ground forces to neutralize these as a more cost-efficient method? And I just realized it's my fault. He made a note that he could not ask it in question, and I just glossed over that. So that's my bad. But
yeah, I mean that's part of the logic underlying stand-in forces and spreading out into more distributed forces. Is just that it tries to flip the cost curve against the Chinese. But this is actually an approach you don't hear it specifically alluded to all that much on our side of the Pacific. But it goes back to an approach pioneered by Andy Marshall at ONA in the 1970s and into the 1980s, the end game of the Cold War, called competitive strategies. And the basic idea is that we should try to steer a competition with a foreign opponent in a direction well, first of all, that is actually cost competitive for us. Try to steer the competition into areas in which we can compete affordably while compelling the adversary to compete at very high cost to itself. So that was the idea of essentially trying to bankrupt the Soviet Union towards the end. So try to steer the competition into areas like that, and thus cause the adversary to expend its resources at an unsustainable pace. And also, the other part of it is just to get to know that adversary culturally and try to figure out what sort of strategic moves we can make that will really resonate with that adversary. We knew in the late Cold War that the Soviet Union was very defensive minded because of Russian history and so forth. And these are some of the insights that went into the maritime strategy of the 1980s. As far as targeting ballistic missile submarines and bastions adjoining the Soviet homeland and so forth. So I think we're actually trying to get that. In fact, we did a big conference about a decade ago and put out a book and some of the writings about this idea of renewing competitive strategies for the 21st century. So I think that sort of thing has come back into vogue. If we can dare China to waste expensive ballistic missiles on small bodies of troops or small warships, at that point, that's going to be hard for them to sustain. I think we just don't know enough about how much all these things cost. But you know what? An anti-ship ballistic missile or something like that is a pretty expensive capability to pit against a small body of Marines armed with missile launchers sitting on an island. So I think China will probably try to avoid pitting that sort of expensive platform against inexpensive hostile capabilities, whether it's the United States or Japan. But so it might end up being cruise missiles. It might end up being amphibious warfare and so forth. Those would seem like the lower cost options. I do think for geography has really blessed us in this competition. However, Moltke the Elder tells us that the tactical defense is the strongest form of warfare. So if we already own something, if you already hold the real estate, somebody else tries to come and take it away, that's a very difficult thing for a variety of reasons. So I hope that as long as we're savvy in our use of sea power in conjunction with land power, I think we actually are in a pretty good place. So as long as we play our cards well.
Great, thank you. And that reminds me, one of my favorite case studies to study these days is looking at the Guadalcanal campaign, where that was exactly what they were doing, right? You can't sink the island, so what can you do to hold it and project strength from where you're at? Okay, so next question we got from. I'm going to go to read Emily's, and we'll go back to Lieutenant Colonel Zepeda's got a second question, and then we'll jump down to Major Wilson. So first, from Emily Eckerman, she's asking, do you think China's aging population will economically slow them down and potentially have implications for their military capabilities?
The answer is yes. I always paint a pretty dark picture. Most of my presentations, as you saw, are pitched down at the military strategic level or below, and I think the dark picture is the one we should paint down at that level. But when you get up to the grand strategic level, China's got a lot of problems. I think it's a lot of internal problems. Like you alluded to China's demographics. Just recently, China has finally abolished they went from a one-child rule a few years ago to a two-child rule, and now they're going to three-child rule, I think. But at the same time, they're going to still have to put up with all the ill effects of those decades of the one-child policy for a very long period of time. So capping the population, the working age population, imposing the benefit or the burden of social welfare spending, and all that kind of stuff. These are all competing demands that China will have to put up with. And it's not just, it's demographics, it's the economic growth, it's the environment is a catastrophe in China, has been for many decades. There's a lot of competing demands as far as military spending and thus foreign adventurism for China. Let's not make China too big a contender. However, I will say this: if Xi Jinping and his lieutenants, if they know all this stuff, if they're candid with themselves about these internal problems that China may have, they might actually see a window of opportunity starting to close. And if that's the case, they might conclude that it's now or never to try to take Taiwan, try to lock in their gains in the South China Sea or whatever, to basically roll the dice and hope that armed conflict will get China what it wants. So just because China has internal problems that will cap the means it has to put into military spending, over the long haul doesn't mean that China is not dangerous today. And in fact, it could be more dangerous. Think about that passage from Clausewitz where he says sometimes it's a good idea for the weak to pick a fight with the strong. If you look at the trend lines, and if the trend lines are going the wrong way, you might want to act today rather than postpone the effort till next year when you might not be in as good a place. So again, a weakening China could be a dangerous China as well.
All right, thank you. Going to next, Lieutenant Colonel Cepeda had another question. Sir, did you want to ask it?
Yes. In your opinion, what is the most significant power projection capability beyond their long-range precision fires from China? And if we deem or can categorize something as a most probable course of action for power projection capabilities, what would that be, and what would be the U.S. best approach to prepare for that and counter it?
Are you power projection outside the Western Pacific?
Yes, sir.
Right. Well, as far as projecting power, I would tend to take a grand strategic look at it rather than look at it through the lens of necessarily military capability. If you look at China's economic diplomacy in places like Latin America and Africa, or even in Europe to a certain extent, I mean that this essentially getting these governments to essentially pool their fortunes with China economically. I mean, as we all know, priority number one for any governments, especially in a developing nation, is going to be development, economic development, and thus prosperity for the people. If China can actually give foreign societies, whether it's in the global South or Europe or wherever, if it can get them to bet their economic fortunes on economic intercourse with China. At that point, China has amassed even potentially geopolitical leverage. In a sense, they can say, "Well, would you rather have trade with China, or would you rather cooperate with the United States on security matters and so forth?" I've started dabbling in South America a little bit in the last few years. I have a lot of friends in the Chilean Navy, and they're always saying, "Man, China's our biggest trading partner. Are we really going to jeopardize that for the sake of security cooperation with the United States?" If Beijing actually chose to make an issue out of some controversy between China and the United States, that's a lot of leverage. That's a lot of leverage for Beijing, threatening to withhold that sort of support. I mean, and there's a range of activities like Chinese firms bidding to operate different utilities or whatnot in foreign countries. I mean, these two tend to again bind these societies together with China and hand Beijing that lever. So I would tend to go towards the economic side as far as power projection outside of the Western Pacific. On the military stuff, I think that China is still. I mean, obviously the home theater, the Western Pacific, is still the primary theater for China. And I think it seems like the expeditionary side probably goes to two other implements of power for the time being. If China manages to settle events in the Western Pacific to its satisfaction, then you might see the PLA take on a more expeditionary character in the coming years. Probably in the Indian Ocean first, but potentially even beyond that.
All right, thank you. All right, next question we got from Major Zach Wilson. He's asking, other than reunification with Taiwan, how does active defense apply to Chinese goals for the offense? What are they looking to achieve, and what actions should we be willing to respond to with violence?
Well, as far as the relationship between active defense and offense, I guess is what you're really asking. I think that's a really excellent active defense. I mean, think about it. And I don't think that they will ever get to this point. I'm not entirely sure they ever think they will get to this point. But I mean, think about it. This anti-access network actually got. What if it was able to actually keep the United States out of the theater? I mean, you could actually accomplish what you wanted to do on the strategic defensive, using Xinhua craft, using shore-based missiles, using all these things that go into anti-access. At that point, and again, this is an ideal case. I don't think that we'll ever get there. But if that were the case, what would you do with the PLA Navy surface fleet? At that point, that could become an expeditionary fleet for the most part. go to go out and do things forward and so on and so forth. So whether it's deploying to the Indian Ocean or even the Atlantic, China has been nosing around in southern Africa looking for a naval base in the Atlantic. It's talked about the Azore Islands potentially being a base. I mean, there is at least some thinking about this sort of more offensive posture. And by the way, it's kind of interesting that in the longer version of this presentation that I give, I actually go back and quote my hero Teddy Roosevelt. I did my first book on him many years ago. But in 1907, he went to Congress and gave a pretty sophisticated rundown on the relationship between shore-based defenses and also short-range naval platforms and so forth in the battle fleet. He essentially said, "Look, American coastlines, American harbors and coastlines need to defend themselves. How do they do that? They do it with mines. They do it with small destroyers. They do it with all these je ne quoi type things. If we can actually mount that buffer off our own coast and hold an adversary's fleet at bay, at that point, he says the battle fleet, the U.S. battleship fleet, can become what he calls footloose. It can roam the high seas. It can interdict hostile trade. It can protect the sea lanes. It can project power onto foreign shores and so forth." That idea of a footloose fleet I think is really, it's not one that you'll hear. That's not a term you'll hear the Chinese use, but I think that's exactly what they would have in mind if anti-access works well enough for them. So a major share of that battle fleet could become a more expeditionary fleet and do the Rooseveltian thing.
All right, thank you. Next question from, let me see what we got here. Major John Behrman. He's our new, he works here for the Center for Regional Security Studies here at the Krulak Center. John, you able to ask your question directly?
Absolutely. Sir, my question was, does China's maritime strategy recognize any potential requirement to secure or at least contest critical sea lines of communication in the event of conflict? It seems like given their dependence on energy imports, many of which are coming out of the Middle East, going through sea lines, going all the way, across the Indian Ocean and coming through choke points such as the Strait of Malacca, do they see that as being something that they may have to actually fight for in the event of conflict? Perhaps that's getting to your point about, the actual PLA Navy fleet being able to be footloose to perform those types of tasks.
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. I mean, in fact, back in the days of Hu Jintao, before he gave way to Xi Jinping, Hu Jintao used to talk about his Malacca dilemma. Just like you said, that's that vital lifeline from the Middle East in particular. Now that China's a net consumer or a net importer of energy, obviously China really has to think about that, to think about those sea lanes. So yeah, which is one reason I would say that the Indian Ocean is sort of the obvious next big thing for the PLA Navy. As Beijing becomes more comfortable with the situation closer to home, it will be willing to detach secondary fleets and so forth. You might see a PLA Navy fleet at places like Gwadar or places like Hambantota, other places that China has been nosing around for economic access, for commercial port access. You could actually see China try to parlay that into naval access as well. It just makes sense. So as far as safeguarding China's sea lanes, absolutely. And of course, China will have to contend not only with the United States, but especially with India. In India's own backyard, if it starts to do that sort of thing, where India will be the home team, it will be on interior lines. It will be to the defender. Some of those advantages that go to China as the home team in the Western Pacific will go to India. Will go to India and its friends and allies in the Indian Ocean. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when China starts to go up against that logic that it has harnessed so well in the Western Pacific. But yeah, as far as and by the way, I think there was actually an offensive aspect to that as well. I would not expect to see China do what the Imperial Japanese Navy did 75, 80 years ago, and not go against U.S. lines of communication into the region. That's the Japanese submarine fleet woefully underperformed, whereas of course our submarine fleet performed extremely well, basically cutting the sinews that held together a maritime empire like the Japan or like Imperial Japan together. I don't think the Chinese would make that same mistake and not target our combat logistics fleet and everything that we depend on to get people and war material into the theater. So I think there's an offensive and a defensive aspect to that question, just as there's always been in naval warfare.
Sorry, I'm switching back and forth between the chat here because we got another question popping up. So I think we got another one here from Jack, who again, I'll ask this question for him here. So he's asking, how may China get my tongue untied. How may China and their military work in the area of subactive conflict to counter U.S. interests in the areas of interest to China specifically? How might the U.S. military best use those same, such as non-lethal capabilities, economics, political leverage, to counter those effects of China?
Yeah, that's sort of the big elephant in the room question. In fact, just I think it was just last month, wasn't it, Ian? We took part in the war game down at Indian Head, Maryland, at the Naval Surface Warfare Center, and that was what it was all about. And it was specifically on gray zone competition in the South China Sea. But I think this is a problem in more zones than that. So I think the findings out of that game, I hope will help answer your question in the coming months. Basically, the game was about trying to figure out how we can use technology to get more, basically to add rungs to our escalation ladder. So if you think about what our options in the South China Sea when contending with the China Coast Guard, the Maritime Militia, backed up by the PLA Navy and shore-based arms of military might, I mean, China has a lot of options vis-a-vis the Philippines, Vietnam, and other contenders in the region. Whereas the United States, I mean, what are our options when we get into one of these confrontations in support of our friends and allies in the region? We can sort of do nothing, use force. Go back to the last question: use violence, or we can nuke them. I mean, aren't those sort of the three big options that the United States has? Whereas China has lots of different options. As the local contender right on the scene in the South China Sea. So there was an enormous amount of creative ideas about new technologies that we can use short of the use of violence to essentially either compel China to escalate and potentially even escalate to the use of force and be seen as the regional bully using force for the first time, or potentially de-escalate down and resume normal interactions in the region. So that ability to incrementally counter-escalate against China, I think is a crucial one. But yeah, so there was a lot of exotic technology, some really wild stuff. One of the teams, we had 3 working groups, and they called their approach the pain in the ass fleet, which I thought was really awesome. They were just lots of small craft, heavy Coast Guard, U.S. Coast Guard involvement, and so forth. So we'll see what comes out of that. Apparently the organizers have they are turning it over to industry and seeing what industry can supply us with to give us more options. My actually, and I think this is not directly on the question, but I gave a short talk to the war game as well. I basically said, look, China's always on the scene. If you want to compete with China in the South China Sea or anywhere else in the gray zone, you have to be on the scene. There seems to be this assumption in the Department of Defense that freedom of navigation operations are somehow a deterrent to misbehavior in the gray zone by China. No, I don't think so. Not at all. I think they're important from a legal standpoint, and should keep going. But at the same time, what do they really demonstrate that would deter China from doing what it wants to in those regions? All we're doing is pulling up a ship and sailing through a disputed expanse of water and going away. Not much deterrent impact there. So we have to figure out how to be there on the scene in order to compete. Otherwise, we know China's there all the time, 24/7, 365 in superior force. So that's kind of where we are right now, trying to fix this strategic problem.
Yeah, and as you said that, I remember the graph from the last time you were on the broadcast when Hunter Stiers had his little diagram of, what does the FONUPS do as it rolls on through there and then rolls on back out. It was pretty stark.
Oh, okay. There they are. Well, okay, bye. I mean, exactly how competitive is that?
Yeah, and Jack had a follow-up, and I'll try and cover down on some of it, but he was asking about that gray zone war game, if the results are available anywhere. And my understanding is this is still an iterative process and there's nothing available yet. But we at the Krulak Center, as well as Dr. Holmes and a bunch of other folks, are all plugged into it. So as opportunity presents and as as the level of releasability allows it, we'll certainly share some of the outcomes from that where possible. Okay, coming up here on the top of the hour, and we're out of questions on the chat. So, sir, happy to give you some last final comments, and then we'll close it out.
No real closing comments. Except other than that, it's a real pleasure to have joined the Krulak Center. I had an experience as a midshipman back in the 1980s that I don't think you would ever get again. I was in NROTC at Vanderbilt, and our unit was entirely dominated by Marines, between a very senior Marine colonel and also a Marine officer instructor, sort of the third in command, who was a huge personality. We sort of had a milquetoast XO, Navy XO, and therefore I felt like I was raised by Marines, and also just to hear all the stories about Krulak and of course Chesty Puller and all those great figures from the past. So it's a real pleasure to join you today and join you for the next couple of years, and I hope that we will help advance our cause in the Western Pacific and elsewhere in the world. So, hey, thanks everybody for coming out. It was a real pleasure. And by the way, I guess there is one point. Drop me a line at any time. It's not only an obligation for myself to answer email with people such as yourselves, but it's actually a real pleasure. Especially in the last couple of years with the pandemic, I don't get out of Newport nearly as much as I'd like to talk to people out on the front lines. So that's a good second best. So please don't hesitate.
Yeah, well, no, thank you very much for that. And for anyone who wants to start getting a hold of Dr. Holmes, feel free to contact myself, and I can help arrange that. And yeah, fingers crossed that we can actually get you down here in person this academic year, but we'll just kind of see how everything plays out.
Yeah, I may be on sabbatical for most of the spring and summer next year. So at that point, that would be a great time to come down.
Yeah, it would. And we've just put aside a new cubicle in our spaces for our non-resident fellows. So
there you go.
Come and join the party here. Okay, so thank you, sir, for your time today. Thank you to everyone in our audience for joining us. We will be back next week where we'll be introducing the last of our new non-resident fellows, Captain Walker Mills, United States Marine Corps. He'll be talking to us about writing as a military professional, some of the lessons that he's learned. Anyone who's even slightly familiar with Walker Mills knows he's a very prolific writer, very good one, and he's got a lot of good knowledge he can pass on to those who are either looking to enter into that world or have sort of dabbled in the waters but want to get better. So we'll be pushing out that invitation and registration here over the weekend. So again, thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody, and have a good day.
Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.